Welcome to the Gajo Guild 2023 virtual show. I'm Rob Pullum and this is my journey into making homemade loco gearboxes. This all started as a result of chatting with friends and fellow guild members who are building their own gearboxes out of PCB. As luck would have it, at the Barnsley show this year I saw on a little grab box a worm and gear wheel, so I bought those for a fiver and thought this'll be a start into making my own gearboxes. Some time ago I discovered that I could produce working drawings in Fusion 360 from 3D designs. Since then, Fusion has become my go-to for producing drawings of even the most basic things that I wish to make. I started by drawing up the back plate, then one of the side plates, and from that I created a mirror image. Although I plan to use BA screws to hold the frames together, I have Fusion set up in metric, so I added the nearest equivalent metric threads to the screw holes. This will become important later. In order to work out the axle hole position, I measured the outer diameter of the worm and drew that in, again adding a metric equivalent thread, which in this case was M11 by 1.5mm pitch. At this point in time I didn't know that Fusion 360 has an add-on for creating gears, so I just drew it a tooth shape and used a circle function to repeat it until I had the gear which matched the diameter of the gear that I had bought. By moving the gear into a position so that it meshed with the worm, I was able to add in an axle. These are the working drawings that I produced from Fusion to use when machining the parts. It was at this point that I was talking to fellow member Kerry Viney, who lives in Queensland in Oz. He has been building gearboxes for some time but wanted to improve upon them. He asked me to send him my STL files from my design so that he could print them out on his 3D printer to check that all was as it should be. You can imagine my surprise when I spoke to him next that not only had he printed them out, he had assembled the gearbox using metric fixings in the 3D printed threads that I had added to the design, and what was even more surprising was that it actually ran under power. Now we move on to the machining of the actual gearboxes themselves. First of all, I cut out all the parts and machined them square using the mill. I made 2 sets of each just in case. Then I drilled out all the holes using a vice stop so that I could drill one hole, spin it round, drill another hole in the same place, flip it over, drill another hole, etc, etc. This was to have a bit of a bearing later in the process. Then I tapped them all 10BA using a homemade nut spinner, details of which can be found on the Guild forum. Next process was to mark out for the mounting holes for the motor, and then using drills and slot drills to enlarge holes and mill the slots, I got those prepared. And finally, for the machining bit, I drilled holes in one pair, axle holes in one pair of the side plates. I mentioned earlier that I plan to use BA screws to hold the parts together. This is because some time ago I bought 500 countersunk 10BA screws and I wanted to use some of them. As they came, they were an inch long, so I needed to cut them down consistently. Like many, I suspect, I have a small box of offcuts that I use for various things, and one piece was suitable. I faced it off to 10mm long and then drilled and tapped it 10BA, adding a countersink at one end. This allows me to screw in a screw, tighten it against the countersink, hold it in a collet, and then part off to length multiple times. Now for the moment of truth. I assembled the first gearbox, and although it went together and would turn over by hand, my designing was much better than my machining. There wasn't a bit of it that was square to each other. Upon close examination I had got one of the holes in the back plate edges off centre, and because I had used a vice stop to swap the parts end for end, This meant that I had propagated the error on the other side too. Sadly, I had repeated this error on the second back plate as well. However, after a bit of head scratching, I came up with a way to possibly recover the back plates before making new ones. Using the lengths of 10BA screw that I had cut off, I screwed them into the holes from opposite sides and tightened them against each other. I then cut off the excess and filed it smooth, and then, taking much more care, I centre drilled the middle of the stock and then re-drilled and tapped the holes. This meant that the second pair of frames were now square and I could plot and drill the axle holes on the second pair of side frames. Here we have the second attempt. I'm pleased with this as I've at least got everything square. Next we'll see if it runs. We've assembled the gearbox and I'm now giving it the first test run by winding it manually. So far so good. Next test under power. I connected the motor up to my old Gauge Master controller and I'm pleased to say that it runs quite nicely in both directions. So for a first stroke second attempt, I'm really pleased with it. So it's gearboxes to be continued. I would like to thank you for visiting the virtual show, and I hope that you got a little something from this video and that you enjoy the rest of the virtual show. Thank you.